Today we are with Chris Williamson, an ex-member of Parliament, and who actually is leading a new party called Resist Movement for a People's Party. And I am gonna interview him because of the newborn party that now he is promoting. I was very pleased of meeting him in England recently, and we had a chance to talk, and it was very interesting what I saw and the movement that he's starting. So, Chris, thank you very much for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Carlos. Good to be here.
The first question I would like to ask you is, why the name resist? What is it that we have to resist?
Well, I think it's the relentless neoliberal trajectory of the mainstream parties in Britain. Regrettably, we don't have a party now that I think represents the interests of the vast majority of the public. I think representative democracy has broken down in Britain and in many parts of the world, to be fair, but certainly in Britain, I think it's broken down. And the representatives that we have in our parliament represent the interests of global corporations. That's why in the fifth biggest economy in the world, which the United Kingdom is, we have around 14 million people living in poverty. 1.5 million people are absolutely destitute, and precarious employment is now endemic throughout the land. We have a massive housing crisis. Our public services are in meltdown. Many of the secure jobs that people used to enjoy when I was a young man growing up in a city called Derby, when manufacturing was a significant part of the economy, many of those jobs have been offshored to low-wage economies. And so we, I think, need to have a reset. As I say, democracy isn't working. The mainstream parties don't represent the interests of ordinary people. We did have a chance, we felt, with Jeremy Corbyn, but unfortunately the Corbyn project was defeated, and now the Labour Party it's worse than reverting to type in a sense, because I don't think the Labour Party represented the interests of working class communities. But now it's very clear whose interests the Labour Party is serving, and it's not the interests of the vast majority of the public. So I think we're looking to try and build a new movement, build a new political vehicle. But the most important thing is mobilising the public, raising political consciousness and raising political expectations. And I think if we can do that, then we have a chance of pushing back against the relentless neoliberal drive that we've seen over the last 4 decades.
And what are the main cornerstones of Resist?
Well, we've published a 10-point plan, which highlights our key policies. People who might be interested in that can find that by logging on to resistmovement.org.uk on the internet. But we focus on things like the climate catastrophe, the need for a genuine Green New Deal, the need for a different economic approach, I think, to a recognition that Britain has its own sovereign currency, that we don't really have any other than lack of political will to create a good society, to invest in the infrastructure, to invest in public services, to ensure that people can have a good life, as it were, particularly, as I say, in a wealthy economy. And so we recognise that being a currency issuing nation, that we have huge opportunities as a result of that, to use that understanding to ensure that we can address all the challenges that are currently facing the country. We also want to see a reset in relation to things like education. The education service has been fragmented, and we want to deal with that. We want to get rid of tuition fees, for example. We don't think people should be penalised for getting a higher education. We want to tackle the housing crisis in the country. As I've said, there's a massive housing crisis in Britain, completely unnecessary. People living on the street, people literally dying on the street. Indeed, we've seen people dying homeless people dying on the steps of the Houses of Parliament. I mean, it's an absolute scandal. And we want to deal with things like the justice system, which is not working either. I mean, justice really is a rich person's occupation, really. People who have limited resources, don't get a fair deal out of the justice system. We want to see a fairer social security system in Britain. Britain has probably one of the most parsimonious social security systems anywhere in Europe. And again, that's completely unjustified. I mean, they're continually increasing the retirement age. I mean, women in Britain used to be able to retire at 60. It's now, for younger women, 68 before they can take their retirement pension. This is just outrageous. So we want to see that dealt with, and we want to see a proper social security system that does genuinely give people security. If they fall ill or are unemployed, then they shouldn't be thrown into penury. And we want to also look at the constitution. The monarchy that we have in this country we don't think is appropriate in the 21st century. We think there's a need to look at the electoral system. Now that's in desperate need of reform as well, the first past the post system that we have in Britain. So these are the kind of core issues that we are concerned about, but obviously we're just setting out on a journey. We want to be a member-led organisation, and so those policies will develop over time. But the key thing really is ensuring that we empower communities. That's the aim, really, to empower communities, to empower ordinary people, and to, if you like, give people the confidence to recognise the strength of collective solidarity, that we can fight back, we can make the system work in the interests of the many, but we can only do that if we give people the confidence to stand together, shoulder to shoulder, and if you like, to recognise the commonality between us, and that the real challenges and the real, if you like, villains of the piece are the people at the top of society, the 1%. And I think if we can do that, then I think we've got a fighting chance of making a difference. And I suppose the final thing really is what we've said is that we're very keen to ensure that we bring all of progressive groups and all left-wing parties and groups together to ensure that we do have that collective strength rather than being fragmented. And of course, we know the British Empire was one of the most successful empires on earth, and they achieved that success through a policy of divide and rule, and that tactic is still alive and kicking inside the British establishment, and that's something that we need to guard against, and to bring to the fore really the old Labour movement maxim that unity is strength.
And would you say that is what makes Resist special? Because we have heard also, we have known also other alternatives and other initiatives in the past, but what would you say that makes Resist special? What does Resist bring to the table that other parties don't?
Well, we're not saying that we've got all the answers, and what we're saying is that we, as I was just saying really, that we want to bring other groups and parties together, and to rather than focus on, which has been it's bedeviled the left in Britain, really down through the ages really. We've been very good at falling out amongst ourselves, and what we're saying is that we want to collaborate, we want to work together. We're not saying it's our way or the highway. What we're saying is that we can bring something to the table, but the main thing really is, I think, is that the importance of collaboration on the left and empowering people on the ground, as it were. And that's really the driving force, I think, behind the notion of the Resist movement, that sense of collaboration, of cooperation. It's the only way in which we're going to cut through, I think, because we have a very unfair voting system in this country. Although electoral politics isn't the be-all and end-all, and it's very important that we acknowledge there is a need for electoral politics, and there's a role for us to play there. But more important than that is about building a movement in the country, and empowering people in communities and giving them the confidence, raising political consciousness, raising political expectations. And the truth is that a lot of emphasis is placed on electoral politics in Britain, and yet the biggest cohort in every election are the people that don't vote. Every election, there's 15 or 16 million people that don't vote. And Boris Johnson's Conservative Party won a landslide majority with 13 million votes at the last election. But the non-voters were well over 15 million. And I think our task, our goal is to mobilize many of those people who've given up on politics, really. And so we want to empower them and as I say, give them the confidence that politics can make a difference, but only if we stand together in solidarity. The elites in society, the establishment in Britain, have power because they have a lot of resources at their disposal. They have a lot of money at their disposal. They have the media in their pockets. But we have strength. Ordinary people have strength when they stand together in solidarity. And when we do that, in the words of the Percy Shelley poem, The Mask of Anarchy, we are many and they are few. And I think it's about really trying to, encourage people to realize that the power which is in their own hands. But only if we can, as it were, get people to collaborate and to cooperate and to stand together in solidarity with each other.
You have talked about the Labour Party. You yourself come from the Labour Party, but the Labour Party has expelled 120,000 of its own members. Why do you think that those ex-members of the Labour Party should join and support Resist?
Well, I think it embodies the spirit of the Corbyn project. When Jeremy Corbyn was elected the leader of the Labour Party, I mean, he really did inspire literally hundreds of thousands of people to join the Labour Party, millions of people to support the Labour Party. And I mean, it's interesting because in the run into the 2017 election, there was a rearguard effort being mounted by the vast majority of the Parliamentary Labour Party, by the Labour Party's own bureaucrats who were working to sabotage Jeremy Corbyn's bid to become the Prime Minister in this country. They were actively working to ensure that Labour didn't win. And this is incredible, frankly, but this is what happened. Now, this is a matter of record now. And in spite of that, in spite of the incredibly adverse publicity that was heaped on him and the Labour Party and his supporters, Labour saw the biggest increase in vote share since 1945 in that 2017 election. I think Jeremy missed a trick, really, when we came close to winning in 2017. I think he should have consolidated his position then by dealing with some of the malcontents inside the Labour Party. I think he should have withdrawn the whip from them. I think he should have stood up to the ridiculous, bogus smears that were being levelled against him and against people like me and others, claiming that we were anti-Semites. This was essentially a tactic to undermine Jeremy's anti-imperialist stance and his pro-Palestinian stance. And because he didn't fight back against that, because he treated those bad faith actors as if they were making good faith complaints, when we know this was nothing to do with anti-Semitism. I mean, indeed, many of the people that have been expelled, and indeed were expelled back then, were themselves Jewish. So it's absolutely nothing to do with that, and everything to do with maintaining the status quo. And this was a tactic. This particular smear was the one that they went to because they could see that it was gaining traction, and it was only gaining traction because Jeremy was giving them the oxygen, if you like, by continually apologising and making concessions to them when he had nothing to apologise for. The Labour Party had nothing to apologise for. I mean, anti-Semitism was not a thing inside the Labour Party. Very, very, tiny examples maybe. I never ever came across any, but I'm sure there probably was one too. But it was not an endemic problem or anything of the sort. And he didn't do that, and so that then gained traction. People were being targeted and suspended and expelled from the party. These were Jeremy's strongest supporters, his Praetorian Guard. These were the socialist, anti-imperialist, anti-racist campaigners who were being targeted. So that was a big mistake. And then, of course, he backed down on the issue of Europe. I mean, we had a referendum in Britain. Jeremy campaigned for a Remain and reform agenda, as I did myself, although I don't think the European Union is capable of reform on reflection now. But in the end, the people voted, and we should have, the Labour Party should have, Jeremy should have said, we accept the will of the British people in that referendum. Indeed, that's what they did say in the general election in 2017. And frankly, I think had Jeremy, stood up to the Zionist lobby and defended his strongest comrades, people like me, I was his loudest champion inside the parliamentary Labour Party. Had he done that, and had he also stood up to the saboteurs like Sir Keir Starmer, who now leads the Labour Party, who are using the issue of Europe as a wedge, as a way of undermining Jeremy, because they knew that Jeremy was a Euro-skeptic, had been all his political career, actually. And I think he should have faced them down. And I think Labour should have gone into that election saying that Labour will get Brexit done, because the Tories were able to steal a march on the Labour Party. You've got the kind of bastions of the establishment in the form of people like Boris Johnson, as a pillar of the establishment, portraying himself as an anti-establishment figure. And he was able to get away with that because the Tories had a very simple message saying, get Brexit done. Now, I was arguing this point inside the Labour Party, inside the Parliamentary Labour Party, that we need to be saying that we will get Brexit done. The only difference is that Labour will deliver a people's Brexit, not a banker's Brexit. And of course, my words fell on deaf ears, and it was a disaster waiting to happen. I mean, it's like signing their own suicide note. But all that hope and all that expectation that Jeremy, that was embodied in Jeremy Corbyn's leadership has now been dashed. And so many people, like you say, have left the Labour Party. Many people are being expelled from the Labour Party. Labour now is the flip side of the establishment Conservative Party. Now, they're offering very little difference. It'd be just tinkering at the edges. Essentially, they are a neoliberal pro-war party. And I think what the Resist movement offers is a home for the people who were inspired by the Corbyn project, were inspired by Jeremy Corbyn and everything that that project represented, because that no longer exists inside the Labour Party. It has no home inside the Labour Party. And so I would urge anybody who was inspired by the Corbyn agenda to join us and let's work together to build this alternative. Because one of the things is interesting, what Jeremy was saying, particularly at the outset of his bid to become the leader, he used to make the point that it's not about him. He used to say, it's not about me, it's about you, it's about all of us. And I just think we need to, capture that spirit. And I think that's what we're trying to achieve with the Resist movement. And, we can only succeed, though, if we can bring people to us. And, if we can encourage people to recognise the strength of their common endeavour. But that's all I would say, that, as you probably can gather to some extent from the core values and policies that we've already embraced, they're very much in keeping with the spirit that was embodied in that Corbyn project. And that's why I think people should come to us, because we're keeping that flame alive.
And do you think that if you are successful in gathering that part of the British society, is a socialist government in Britain possible?
Well, I mean, it's difficult, obviously, because the establishment are incredibly powerful. They have the media, as I've already said, in their pocket. There are enormous vested interests who are well entrenched in Britain and will do everything in their power. As we saw when we got Jeremy Corbyn as the leader of the Labour Party, they're absolutely determined to smash any semblance of a socialist, anti-imperialist government getting a sniff of power. I think it was his anti-imperialist stance in particular that frightened the establishment. The military-industrial complex is very influential in Britain. It's incredibly profitable. Britain is I think it's the second biggest arms exporter in the world. Certainly one of the highest arms exporters anyway in the world. And Jeremy, when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party, I mean, he established a Minister for Peace and Disarmament, which is the last thing, of course, that the military-industrial complex wanted. They thrive on wars. They thrive on instability around the world. They thrive on the chaos in the Middle East. They thrive on the absolutely brutal treatment of the Palestinian people by the apartheid state of Israel. And Jeremy what Jeremy Corbyn represented was the very antithesis of that. And so those vested interests are incredibly powerful, and they will do everything they can, of course, to destroy any possibility. And they achieved that. I mean, I think we could have got through, but Jeremy, backed down, made some wrong turns, and we are where we are now. So is a socialist government possible? I think we have to believe it is. I do think it is, actually, but only if we can bring people together. And, if we can unite the left. That's a big task. It's a difficult ask to bring off. We've never achieved it in the past, uniting the left outside the Labour Party, I mean. But if we can achieve that, then I do think everything to play for. Because, look, socialism is popular. I mean, I know Labour didn't do well in the last election, but that for a range of different reasons, really. I think Europe was the main one. And, of course, that was a big mistake, the policy position that Labour took on the European question, when they said that we would have a second referendum, and that some key figures, people like the John McDonnell, who was one of Jeremy's key confidants, he was the shadow chancellor, said that he not only supported a second referendum, but said he would campaign for Remain. Well, that clearly went down incredibly badly. But then if you actually look at the other policies, though, which didn't get a hearing because of the European question, because of the nonsense over anti-Semitism. And also, I think, frankly, as well, the timing of the election was absurd. I mean, Labour had the opportunity to prevent that election from taking place in the middle of winter. It was almost the winter solstice. It's ludicrous. And the way in which Labour were able to make such progress in the 2017 election, in spite of the sabotage attempts, which I've already referred to, was because of the on the street campaigning. There was a real buzz that was created because they had thousands of people in my own constituency. I had hundreds of people every day, literally hundreds of people on the street campaigning, and it was a very visible campaign. And that was, of course, impossible in the middle of winter. But, just to go back to your point, though, is a socialist government ever possible? Socialism is popular. You look at the policies, in relation to, making sure our utilities come under, public ownership, that we have free access to education, from the cradle to the grave, that we address our housing crisis. All these things are really popular. Bringing our railways back into public ownership, giving people greater say over the public services that operate in their areas, giving people greater influence over the way the economy works, so that we create a fairer and more decent society. People support that. I mean, the polls overwhelmingly show that those individual policies were incredibly popular. There was a funny little vignette where a former Conservative MP who worked for a political programme called the Daily Politics went round a town in Surrey. It's the sort of capital of the home counties, really. It's kind of very solid sort of Tory area, looking for what he referred to as secret socialists. And he was stopping people on the street and asking them if they supported a range of different policy propositions, like things like scrapping tuition fees, bringing railways back into public ownership, regulating the housing market to stop these profiteering landlords and things like that. And people were almost universally supportive of them. And then he was saying to them, well, you're a secret socialist then, aren't you? You support, these are the policies of Jeremy Corbyn. And he had a little clipboard where he had these policies, and he's flipped the clipboard around, and there was a big picture of Jeremy Corbyn. Well, some of the people that he was talking to, when they saw that these were the policies of Jeremy Corbyn, they kind of recoiled in horror, because the media had done such a hatchet job on Jeremy. But it just shows you, though, that the policy program, the policy agenda, the values that socialism underpins, I think, are almost universally popular in this country. And there is a growing awareness now, of course, and a growing concern about the potential for climate catastrophe. And I think people are increasingly waking up to the fact that the only way we're going to avert climate catastrophe is through a socialist solution. It's corporate capitalism that has brought us to the brink of catastrophe, has brought us to the brink of disaster, and it's only socialism that is going to save us. And I think people are increasingly waking up to that. So it's a long-winded answer, but I think despite the barriers, the hurdles in our way, I do think it's possible. It's not going to be easy, but I think it's possible to bring about a socialist government, that is.
I totally agree, and I think you are really very much on the point. in my opinion, in my humble opinion, one of the aspects that makes Resist and your movement and your position special is your interest on modern monetary theory, which is the field where I have worked the most. Would you like modern monetary theory and the proposal of fiat socialism to play a role in the economic program of Resist?
Oh, very much so, and indeed we've made that point in our sort of 10-point program. Actually, I think it's crucial that we understand the opportunities that an understanding of modern monetary theory offers. A progressive interventionist government. When I was an MP, I did try to persuade John McDonnell, when he was the Shadow Chancellor, to embrace modern monetary theory, to use it as a lens to understand how the monetary system operates. And unfortunately, I was rebuffed. John, in the 2017 election, and in the 2019 election for that matter, he produced a compendium document that went alongside the manifesto, and it identified, every area of tax increases that they were going to implement in order to fund the various programs that they were putting forward. And I remember John cracking a joke about the Conservative Party, which was very light on that sort of detail. And he was saying the only numbers in the Conservative manifesto were the page numbers. Now, it was a funny soundbite, but it kind of missed the point, really, that money is no object for a currency issuing nation. And the work that you've done, Carlos, in relation to fiat socialism, I think, is absolutely crucial, and it's really important. And again, it's good. It's people are waking up to this. Sadly, not in the Labour Party, and certainly not at the upper echelons of the Labour Party, is this being recognised. We still hear people talking about this notion of taxpayers' money and how we're going to afford X, Y, and Z. And rather than having that understanding that literally money is no object, the issue is the capacity of the economy. That's the key thing. Do we have capacity, idle capacity in the British economy? Yes, we have lots of idle capacity in the British economy. Millions of people are unemployed. Millions more are underemployed. So there's plenty of spare capacity there. Are there things that need to be done? Yes, we have a massive crisis in terms of our infrastructure is not fit for purpose. Our public services are not fit for purpose. And so, matching those two things together, I think, is absolutely crucial. And particularly in relation to, for example, addressing the climate catastrophe. I mean, one of the things that we've talked in our program, in our 10-point plan, about the need, for example, to reforest the uplands of Britain. And this is something that needs to be done, obviously, around the world, but we can play our part. And that will also not just help to, reverse the negative consequences of, climate change, but it will also help in relation to, adaptation, because if we can reforest our uplands, that will hold water when we have these extreme weather events. It will hold water in the hills for longer, it will release it more slowly, therefore reducing and hopefully eliminating the potential for serious flooding downstream. I mean, there's only so much you can do in terms of building higher and higher flood defense walls. So all these things are, possible if you kind of have a better understanding, really, of how the monetary system works. So I think that's absolutely crucial. And, one of the key things that we want to do as we move forward, and we'll be embarking on a nationwide speaking tour in the new year, to speak with people in the the different regions of the country, and this will be one of the key points, because what we want to do, as I've already said, Carlos, is to raise people's political consciousness and raise people's political expectations. Those two things, I think, go hand in hand. And if we can inform people about how the monetary system operates, then the establishment, then the politicians who have pulled the wool over our eyes forever when they say that austerity is necessary, or we can't afford X, Y, and Z, then I think if we can empower people with that knowledge, then they can use that knowledge to hold their politicians to account and demand demand better, demand the decent society that we all deserve, really. And literally is no excuse at all for anybody to be in poverty or struggling with housing, or to be forced to take on huge debts to get a higher education, or indeed to continue to work until they drop, or to be forced to pay huge fees for social care when they become too infirm to be able to manage to live independently in their own homes. So these are the challenges, I think. And often people, because Margaret Thatcher with a "there is no alternative" mantra, which was then embraced by Tony Blair and subsequent Labour politicians, and that also, in spite of the radical agenda that Jeremy was putting forward, he also constrained the Corbyn project, because John McDonnell did not embrace an MMT insight into how the monetary system operated. So yes, it will be very much a cornerstone, frankly, of Resist's offer, if you like. And the key thing, as I say, is that raising people's consciousness, about this. And it was, just in conclusion, and I'm sure you're familiar with this quote from Henry Ford, who said that it's well that that people don't know how the monetary system and the banking system operated, for if they did, there'll be a revolution by tomorrow morning. And our job is to try and create that revolution.
Absolutely. And what John McDonnell doesn't understand, and many people on the left doesn't understand, is that that myth of the taxpayer money is actually the myth of Margaret Thatcher, when she said that there is only taxpayer money, which is absolutely false. There is no taxpayer money. There is only state money. And
indeed, yes, you're right. Thatcher said, the problem with socialism is they eventually run out of other people's money, which is just ridiculous. The tragedy, the real tragedy of the Corbyn project, there's many tragedies, but one in relation to this particular area is that when Jeremy was standing to become the leader in his first run at becoming the leader, he was being advised by Richard Murphy from the Tax Justice campaign, a campaign that was established by him some time ago in this country. And he was embracing modern monetary theory. And he earned the kind of sobriquet of Corbynomics. This was a sort of an attempted put down by the former neoliberal shadow chancellor Chris Leslie, who had also been a New Labour in the New Labour government, and he talked about this economic mumbo jumbo that Corbyn is talking about, and he referred to it as Corbynomics, which was then embraced because it was quite a good strapline. But the tragedy is they never then went forward and argued for Corbynomics. That's the tragedy, and Richard Murphy was never brought in to the as an advisor to Jeremy. I suspect that was John McDonnell that didn't want that. I don't know for sure, but John was not keen on that. And in fact, I remember trying to persuade John to meet Stephanie Kelton, who was on a speaking tour at the time when she was still, or just after she'd been advising Bernie Sanders on MMT, and she's written a very instructive book, The Deficit Myth. And she was prepared to take some time out of her busy schedule to meet John, but he wouldn't meet her. It's a real shame. And so that Labour missed a trick there, and we certainly don't intend to miss a trick, and we will be putting it front and centre of our offer as we go forward.
Absolutely, and I think that puts you above all the other political alternatives. No, I think it's crucial that people understand that people understand the necessity to disconnect tax recollection and spend capacity. That is crucial. And I think that you are the only one really putting that on the table. That makes you very special, and that shows that you are much more advanced in your political proposals than the rest of the parties. But let me ask you about more practical political campaigns. You say that you are going to go in a tour through the whole country. In what election will Resist candidate first? And what relationships will Resist maintain with other parties? Will Resist candidate alone?
Well, I mean, we haven't completed the process of registering as a political party yet, but when we do, it's likely, obviously, that we will be putting up candidates in probably local elections in the first instance, local council elections. But we've got to absolutely continue to collaborate with other parties. We have a seat on a body called the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, and we'll continue to hold that seat. We work very closely with the Workers' Party in Britain, and indeed, we campaigned. Many of our members went and campaigned for George Galloway in a by-election when he was standing in the Batley and Spen by-election earlier this year, and we nearly got a breakthrough. The Labour Party fought an incredibly dirty campaign there, and they just managed to get them over the line. We're also involved, as well as with the Trade Union Socialist Coalition and the Workers' Party. We also have a seat on a body called the Progressive Alliance of the Left, which has a range of other new emerging parties of the left who participating in that, the Northern Independence Party and the Breakthrough Party and various other groups, Left Unity. So we're going to continue to work with those, and I want to get some sort of formal agreement if we can. And I think the key thing will be that we ensure that we have an electoral pact at the very minimum, where we don't stand against each other, because that will be disastrous, particularly in the electoral system that we have in this country. We've seen that in the past, where you've had several, left-wing parties, fight against each other in an election. It just makes no sense at all. And so, yes, we will certainly be looking to collaborate, cooperate, and reach that sort of agreement. But, as I've already said, Carlos, I mean, it's important to bear in mind that whilst electoral politics are important, what is more important than that, in my opinion, is actually mobilizing and empowering the public at large, to keep coming back to this point about raising political consciousness, to, give people a sense that there are things that they can do. I mean, they do have power through solidarity, and so that will continue to be the main focus of what we do, because without that strength in depth, without having a social movement behind you, then I think any electoral success, if you could achieve it, and that's a big if, without the social movement, let's assume we did, I don't think it'd be very long lasting, and it'd be very easy for it to be blown off course. I think having a social movement underpinning any elected representatives, I think would keep them rooted in the communities that elected them. I think the problem with our politics in this country is that people get elected to Parliament, or they get elected to local councils, and they just go off piece. They go native. They lose touch with the people that elect them. They lose touch with the values that I presume brought them into politics in the first place. And they often they treat the role as a career, as a job. And that was one of the things I was very passionate about when I was an MP, and I was pushing to democratise the Labour Party, which also made me a target, because I wanted to make MPs more accountable to the membership. And a lot of people didn't want that, and therefore targeted me as accordingly, as it were. And so I think that's we've got to understand that without a social movement behind us, then I don't think we're going to get very far. Particularly, let's say we were to get into government with I mean, it's a long way off. It might not be a long way, but it feels a long way off at the moment. But let's assume, for argument's sake, we got a socialist government. The forces that would be ranged against us would be absolutely colossal. I mean, when Jeremy was first elected as the leader of the Labour Party, a serving general went on the record to basically say they were prepared to commit treason. They said that if a Corbyn-led Labour government were to cut defence spending, to withdraw from NATO, or to scrap Trident, all three of the policies which we have embraced as resist, they would not tolerate it. And his precise words were they would use fair means or foul to prevent that. So we would need, and one of the reasons why I was touring the country campaigning to democratise the Labour Party was to obviously to make MPs and so on more accountable and to give members greater influence over the policy direction of the party and who should the leader be and all the rest of it. But the other reason was to insist that people understood that if we get a Corbyn and Labour government, and if they start to implement the programme that we're talking about, then we're going to need people literally on the street potentially to defend that Labour government. And so that's why I think it's so crucial that we don't just get carried away with electoral politics. Yes, they have a role to play. Yes, it's important, obviously. But without that strength in depth, without that social movement, you're doomed. Well, you're doomed either way. You'll either lose your way, as we've seen, parliamentarians losing their way terribly, or you'll be forced out. There would be a coup.
Yeah, and as you say, of course, it's not a personal issue, and we should, talk about the mass movement. But let me please ask you, what role would you personally like to play in Resist? Would you like to become a member of parliament again?
Well, look, I've no immediate ambitions to become an MP again. I mean, that place is a snake pit, I've got to say. I certainly didn't enjoy it. I mean, the whole edifice, the place isn't fit for purpose. I mean, it kind of, it embodies, it sort of celebrates, Britain's imperialist past. It's a totally unfit for purpose building to begin with. The parliamentarians that are down there, I mean, I just, they're not nice people. So I've no real desire to, if you like, to be rubbing shoulders with them. However, we do need people clearly to get down there and to, make the case and to replace some of these characters, obviously. But so I've no immediate plans, but I'm certainly not ruling out standing again. I mean, if I'm asked and it looks like there's a chance that we could make a breakthrough, then I would certainly seriously consider it. But I think the key thing is, as I've already said, Carlos, we need to be focused on mobilizing people and empowering people, because it shouldn't be about just a few leaders, as it were. Yes, I know movements do need leaders, as it were, to inspire people, etc. But ultimately, I want everybody to be, empowered, everybody to be leaders, if you like. And this was one of the things which I think was so empowering, really, so uplifting about the Democracy Roadshow that I embarked upon when I was still a member of the Labour Party, when I was trying to, democratise the party. Every meeting I went to, I mean, the meetings were packed, and people came out of those meetings, really fired up. And it was very much about, empowering them. I mean, people, if I suppose I was a catalyst, if you like, for that, but people felt good about themselves. They felt empowered themselves. They felt that, there were the things that they themselves could do, they could achieve, as it were, without having to look to some great, messiah type figure, if you know what I mean. And again, I think that's, another reason why obviously I was targeted, because, people were, asserting themselves in that sense, or beginning to do so. And for that reason, I think I had to be taken out, and obviously they succeeded in doing that, partly because there was an unwillingness, a fear from so-called socialist comrades who were members of parliament, who just were unwilling to put their head above the parapet to defend me. And ultimately, the Pastor Niemöller poem is absolutely apposite. First they came for the communists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist, and then they came for the socialists, and I didn't speak out, and then they came for the trade unionists, and then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out, and then they came for me, and there was nobody left. Well, that's precisely what's happened in the Labour Party, and that's what's happened to Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, I did say this to the campaign group, the socialist campaign group of Labour MPs. I said it to Jeremy, that we have to draw a line in the sand. You have to start standing up to these smears. They're completely false. Call it out. And they never would. And I was making a point, look, ultimately they're going to come for you. They're going to destroy this project. They'll come for you, Jeremy. They'll take you out. And that's what they've done. I mean, as you know, Jeremy Corbyn is now, the former leader of the party. It's kind of unprecedented. it's now been suspended. Well, it was suspended completely from the Labour Party. Then it was reinstated to the Labour Party, but he's not a Labour MP. Sir Keir Starmer has refused to reinstate the whip. So Jeremy's in some sort of twilight zone where he's a Labour member of Parliament who isn't a Labour MP. I mean, it's incredible. But you could see the direction of travel, and you didn't need to be a great, political soothsayer to see this. It was, to me, plain common sense that you've got to stand up. You've got to stand in solidarity. You've got to fight back against these people who are the enemies of what we were trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And they just wouldn't. So, yeah, I mean, will I stand? Possibly, but my main focus at the moment is going to be on trying to, build a movement and to give people, confidence around the country, so that hopefully new leaders, new working class leaders will come through and pick up the cudgels to, to take this agenda forward.
Yeah, strong leadership, no? In so many instances of life, weakness is very often the enabler of evil, and I think that is very much the case with the left, a weak left that enables evil to succeed. But I think that you're doing a great job, and in 2018 you coined a term, the term innovative pragmatism, which I think is very interesting. Are the guidelines of innovative pragmatism still valid?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's a phrase I coined more than 20 years before that, actually, Carlos. I may have referenced it in 2018, but yeah, it was really a modus operandi for local governments. I was leader of the council in Derby back then, the leader of Derby City Council. And obviously the powers available to a local authority, particularly in Britain. I mean, Britain is a very centralised country. I mean, unlike most nations in Europe, Germany, France, and so on, Spain, many more powers are devolved to the local level. So there is much more flexibility, much more opportunity at a local level for local politicians to do things without having to go cap in hand and getting permission to do X, Y, or Z from central government. And so, I coined that phrase, innovative pragmatism, really, to try and, I suppose, encapsulate what we were trying to achieve at a local level. I mean, I was very much a municipal socialist, if you know what I mean. And, implementing municipal socialism was difficult in the 1990s, it's got to be said. I mean, there were some great examples in the past, municipal socialists. Just up the road from where I was a local authority leader in another local authority, a place called Clay Cross. They took on the Tory government in the early 1970s and implemented some incredibly progressive policies. I mean, really ahead of their time, and used innovative solutions when the Tories were trying to, impose restrictions upon them and so on. They found ways around it, And similarly, in the early 1980s, with the Greater London Council under Ken Livingstone and Derbyshire County Council under a chap called David the Bookbinder, they were doing some amazing things. And that got progressively more difficult as time wore on, with the various changes in legislation and the cuts that were being implemented by central government, by Tory government, and then obviously continued really by, in terms of the restrictions anyway, by the new Labour government. I mean, they made a bit more money available, more resources were made available, not nowhere near enough, but they were still very much pulling the strings. And so what I was keen to do was to find ways around the restrictions that they were imposing upon us, to find ways around the direction that they wanted us to go in. Well, how could we tweak things, to, as it were, deliver our municipal socialist values within the confines of the restrictions that were being imposed upon us? So, yeah, I mean, I think, particularly at a local level, I think innovative pragmatism is absolutely alive and kicking, and should be anyway. I mean, one of the things, for example, that we will be arguing for at a local level, and indeed I'm going to be speaking at the launch of the Workers' Party local government launch next month, their local government campaign next month, I'll be speaking at. And a couple of things I'll be talking to them about could fall under that heading of innovative pragmatism. One is to introduce a redistributive council tax, whereby under legislation ironically passed by the Conservatives, there's now an opportunity for local authorities to protect the vast majority of the residents in their boroughs and to ask the rich people in the locality to pay considerably more in order to stop the cuts and to build in some growth and some improvement in the public services. It then has to go to a referendum to the wider general public in the area to get sign off for it. But that's one of the things I think we should be arguing for: redistributive council tax to, improve services. And it's a way of engaging with people, because as I say, people would have to vote for it. So you could actually be saying, well, look, this is the option. We want to introduce a system where we're going to ask the rich people in the locality to pay a lot more, so you don't have to pay anything extra. And we want to consult with you as to where you think this extra resources that we're going to generate should go. What improvements in what particular services would you like to see? Should it go on a combination of social care and maybe better leisure services, or do we want the infrastructure improved in some way? So things like that is what I'll be arguing for. And again, in housing as well. And again, ironically, it's been made possible by the Conservative government. There is no restriction now on local authorities building public housing. There used to be a cap on what's known as the housing revenue account. This was the account that local authorities use to finance the public housing in their locality, and there was a cap on that, so there was a limit to how much they could borrow. The thing about housing, of course, is that it pays for itself. I mean, the rental stream will pay for any loan charge, or the vast majority of them anyway, the loan charges. So I'm saying, well, look, local authorities should now use those powers at their disposal to eliminate the housing crisis in their locality, to generate jobs. Local authorities could be building lots of houses for people, and where they haven't got the skills, they could be recruiting people and training people up to be creating decent jobs for people as an economic benefit, an economic stimulus, and that then is creating in the local economy and benefits to the wider local economy as a result of doing that. And where there are skill shortages, those powers which enable the local authority to build those houses can be used to simply acquire properties on the open market. So local authorities have no excuse now for allowing the housing crisis to pertain. I mean, there is still a problem with something called the right to buy, whereby tenants are allowed to buy their council house at a knockdown price. But that, when you're building new properties, that discount and that ability, to buy doesn't kick in for 15 years. So, there is some sort of kind of leeway, if you like, there, which I think local authorities should be taking advantage of. So, yes, innovative pragmatism, absolutely. I think it's alive and kicking. And I've always felt that, when you have a political platform, you should use it. It's not there. You're not got a political, in my opinion, anyway. Having a political platform isn't to sort of enrich yourself or to give you a nice, comfortable lifestyle. I mean, that might be a nice spin-off from it, as it were. But that, it should be much more than that. It should be about using that platform to make a difference. To use those powers at your disposal, if you're in control, to actually implement. And if you're not in power, if you've only got a minority on a local authority, say, but to be making that argument and to be raising the consciousnness of the people in the local area. Because most people are not aware that local authorities could eliminate the housing crisis over a period of time. They're not aware that a redistributive council tax proposition is possible, where local authorities' finances could be raised in a way that would protect the many and ask the few who are well-heeled and able to afford it to pay substantially more. And so, the key thing for me is again, coming back to this point about raising consciousness, giving people that ammunition, giving people those tools, so that then local community. So it's not just people like me that's making the demand. It's the community. It's coming from the bottom up to say, we're not accepting this. We're not accepting the fact that we've got people sleeping on the street. We're not accepting the fact that our children can't move out. We've got adult children living in our house. You've got to do something about this. And I think if we can achieve that, then that will be a huge boon. It will be transformational potentially, to empower people in that way. Knowledge is power, and that's the key thing for me. And that sort of innovative, pragmatic approach, I suppose, is very much about using these innovative solutions to push for change and to empower people to help you make those changes possible.
Well, thank you very much. It's certainly an extremely interesting proposal for the national level and for the local level. I think that you have exposed very, very detailed proposals that I hope that will be successful nationwide. To finish this interview, could you please remind us and all of our viewers who wants to join Resist where they could go, or what should those persons do if they want to join Resist?
Well, yes, absolutely. Obviously, clearly, we'd welcome new members. I mean, they can find us on the internet if they just key in resistmovement.org.uk. That's all one word: resistmovement.org.uk. They'll be able to find us, and they can join directly there, or they can follow us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is at MFA. That's Movement for a People's Party. It stands for MFA People's Party, all one word. MFA People's Party, at MFA People's Party. And then on Facebook, you can find us at The Resist Movement. So if you just go into Facebook and then search The Resist Movement, you'll find us there. And then the details about joining and the website will be both on the Twitter page and on the Facebook page. And thank you for inviting me on today, Carlos, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to set out some of our thoughts. And certainly thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to plug how people can find out more and hopefully join us.
No, thank you. Thank you for your wonderful initiative. I wish you all the best, and we will keep in contact, and I am sure that you are going to be successful.
Well, I hope so. Thanks very much indeed, Carlos. I appreciate your confidence. Thank you.